Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the State of the AI Union. Today, I am joined by Imran Syed, CEO of HatchProof, an AI performance coaching platform, and I'm so glad to have him here. So, Imran, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us about HatchProof?
Yeah, it's so excited to be here, Laura. Thanks so much for the opportunity. HatchProof is a genesis of what I saw failing at performance inside of organizations, complete misalignment between expectations and what we as employees were expected to do. And so much of performance feels theatrics. It feels input based. It feels such a past look and doesn't really fit the context of what we want to do today and how we want to think about organizations, especially forward moving organizations. And we're tackling that massive, massive problem through a very innovative agentic way of looking at it.
That's amazing. And we just spoke about how you are Canadian. So, statistically, you're more polite than the rest of us. As as a point of note, how do you think being polite has helped or hurt having performance reviews?
I I think Canadians are there's a misconception that Canadians are polite. I think that's a misconception. I think Canadians lean in and listen. And we listen first and I'm proud to be Canadian and American and kind of getting both perspectives. I actually spent my early childhood in Saudi Arabia and went to an American boarding school there. And so by the time I showed up to Canada, I knew every single state, every single capital, every single president. I knew American history better than most. And so I've had this like entanglement with America and kind of seeing both sides of the fence. And I think we lean in with listening. And when you start there, conversations tend to go better, and I think that really comes across as being polite. As it pertains to performance, I do think that a lot of performance is how you position yourself
Mm,
and inside of organizations, and you need both hubris and humility to be successful in this world, and I think people should show up with both.
yeah, yeah. I like that perspective. Canadians are better listeners. Okay, that's
I might get some slack for that. There's a lot of great listeners around the world, but I just find from a communication style, if you start there, it usually goes better.
yeah. When we talk about performance, I think it often actually starts with the hiring, and are we hiring for the right people that can eventually perform those roles? And One of the, I think, the key balances that we've often have to contend with is, do we hire for past performance or the capability and potential to meet these future and potential expectations, especially when the job may be a little bit too big. um, you know the shoe size may be a bit too big to fill right now. In a world where AI is really impacting the job itself and how we do the job, how are how are we supposed to think about hiring for current ability versus capability?
Yeah, and you've heard me say that, Laura, right? Where I've always hired for capability versus ability, and if I think about ability, I think about skill sets.
Mm,
And sure, you've got a specific objective or problem to solve, and you're bringing in, human capital to help you fulfill that problem or prospective solution. But what I have found in my experience is like people outgrow the problems they come in to solve, as
mhm,
they should, right?
mhm.
Like as they should. And where do we evolve to inside of the organization? And if we don't have that ability to evolve into other parts of the organization, we often, find dissatisfaction in what we're doing because what we came in to do, we've outgrown it. Organizations can outgrow that from an individual standpoint, and the individual can outgrow it. When we think about performance inside of HatchProof, we really look at two things. We look at organizational contribution and performance or personal development. Both need to exist for fulfillment and longevity of an employee. It counts within the retention piece. And You also notice the happier an employee, right? Like the more output that they're going to produce overall. And so I think capability is this trend that you're going to start to see more and more inside of the workforce, especially in the world of AI, like you touched on, because skills are so easily attainable, right? Leave me alone with my choice of AI, and 30 days later, I can be pretty good at a lot of different things if I apply myself, right? And so what used to be like a T-shaped model for most employees is starting to look a lot more like a rectangle, right? We
Hmm.
can go deep in a lot of different areas instead of just one. Um, that's awesome news for employers out there. That's awesome news, right? Because you have the ability to very quickly adapt your organization to whatever you want to take on next. And that's also exciting for, I think, employees out there because it gives you a chance to go across the organization in a way that you never could before, right? Now, of course, there's like nuances to this, and the larger the organization, usually the more specialized the role kind of becomes. But when we think about like startup culture, I think it's very, very possible to do a lot with very few people.
Yeah. And what do you think, or how are you thinking about how AI can help us assess for capability, versus
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So we use behavioral cues, and Ray Dalio from Bridgewater talks a lot about this. And one of the things I love hearing, and Bridgewater is an early example of this, but he talks a lot about his nature, right? It's in my nature. And to each of us, when I say that word, it could mean anything, right? But we kind of get a sense of like, yeah, that's the way they are, right? Like it's in their nature to do something. We try to boil that down and figure out an individual's nature. And, we've got 9 different nature types that we can span across for individuals. And really, we start to build off of that nature type. And we see it in the way people communicate, we see it in the way they think about self discovery, we see it in the way they show up at work, we see it in the way they show up for others and sort of the connection with the job. And that's really the starting point for us.
Mm, So, like being able to like change the behavior and the habits, it does though sound like, Imran, it kind of implies that you're already starting with good habits and you're making them better.
I think that I wouldn't say that we all have good habits or bad habits, and we. But I will say that starting with knowing where you are
Mm,
makes a big difference.
like the self
And
awareness of where.
yeah, and I would say largely most of us aren't, and
Hmm.
definitely our managers aren't, right?
Mm, mm-hmm.
Of where that starting point is, and that's why like communication is so challenging inside organizations as a whole, right? The number one reason you stay or leave a company is because of your direct manager, right? That's the person you're communicating with, all the time. And like when I was at Oracle, like I'm a big fan of Larry Ellison, right? But so far removed, um, my day to day and sort of my connection to that organization had a lot to do with who I worked for, right? I worked for 2 amazing GVPs, and, like, by the 3rd one, I felt that disconnection, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think all of us have that experience where some boss or some individual has made a profound impact in our life, good or bad, right? And it goes far beyond the organization, and we've associated it to the organization as a whole. And so, like, I think the starting point is, A, figure out your nature, um, figure out the nature types of the people around you, and learn, right? Like how to communicate within those nature types. And it goes way beyond that, for sure. Um, our model and the name of the company actually comes from the behavioral model that we prescribe to. And uh, Hatch stands for habits, aspirations, temperament, convictions, and hard skills. So we look at all of that, right? Skills still matter, right? Don't hire a nuclear scientist for a job just because, the alignment piece is there. They need to have the skills to do the job, of
Right.
course. But, that's what brings that whole human, and proof is like the proof that something new works, is really the origin of where that started.
Would you say that with the rise of AI more recently, that organizations are shifting from a people development culture to a use AI more culture?
Um, I would say most organizations don't know what the fuck they're doing.
Okay.
Yeah, pardon my French. I think everybody knows AI is a source of gain, right?
Yes. Yes.
Most people are looking at it like they've looked at most tools for the past, 30 years, efficiency gains.
Mm. Mhm.
We've always used technology to help us do something faster. Whether that's like the farmer starting with a shovel and a pickaxe to the modern day John Deere or drones kind of over top of it. We've just seen technology associated with efficiency, and we're putting that same model on this new technological wave, right? How can this make us more efficient? Efficiency usually comes with cost cutting, right? Um, but when we think about AI, like there's also this promise of like how much more productive can it make you, right? What
Mhm.
is what is the feat of human capability with a tool like this?
Mm.
We can now very easily, and we probably take for granted, travel anywhere in the world. Like you could book a ticket in the next hour and be in Singapore, within a day, right? And that's incredible. If you just think about like how far we've come to be able to do something like that in the span of time. And those are all technological advances along that value chain that have allowed that to happen. You can book a ticket online. You used to have to go into a place and do that. You have merchants and you can pay for that, digitally. You can show up at an airport. So there's all of these technical advantages that have moved humans forward. And so I think like when I think about AI in the workforce, like there's the efficiency piece that we talk a lot about, and I think most organizations are trying to figure that out. Where does AI come to play? And then I think it is like maximizing human potential piece. How do you take the output of one person and turn it into four of what you've done before? Right. And so I would largely argue most organizations are still trying to figure it out.
Mm.
And we're not really going to know. We're going to look back at this time, and this is going to be like 1999, and we're going to be like, wow, what idiots we were. What infancy,
Right.
the way we were thinking about this, give it 5, 10 years. And it's exactly the way we sometimes look at the past with technological advances today.
Yeah. And on that note, like this like sort of infancy style approach that we're doing, what are you seeing today as it relates to how organizations are maybe doing performance management wrong or using AI in a negative way that's impacting the workforce?
Yeah. So when I was thinking about launching HatchProof, it was important to solve real problems, right? Real organizational problems, and um, if we just take AI out of it, right? Like let's just put AI as a tool in my toolbox, and if I wasn't using AI in this day and age, I'd be crazy, right? Like it would be like a carpenter not using power tools, right? It doesn't make sense. It's a tool in my toolbox. I still need to solve real problems, right? And there's 750 million knowledge workers out there, and largely, performance is all theatrical. It's all past input. It's got a lot of bias. We've got some relics of the industrial age of when we all used to stay at companies for 20, 30 years, and, once a year check-ins made a lot of sense. And that's really not the world that we operate or work in today.
Mm, mhm.
We're looking for a lot more iterative feedback, and we haven't really made those same sort of leaps forward with the way we think about performance. Yet it is such a big driver of key decisions inside any organization. Like merit is tied to it, promotion is tied to it, departures, layoffs, rifts, they're all tied to it. Revenue is tied to it. Still today, like for most organizations, what's the most expensive thing? It's the people capital, right? It's the 70% of the people. So we're making these really, really key decisions on data points that are kind of stuck on gut feel and recency bias and like a lot of input. that's required of it. That's inconsistent. And, my argument is like, there has to be a better way. And, at HatchProof, we really talk about, I never want you to have to write a performance review again.
Mm.
I want you to certainly deliver it, but I want you to have all the knowledge to be able to do that without ever having to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that example that you gave about writing a performance review, it's kind of like my opinion that performance reviews really shouldn't exist because you should be getting a review sort of ongoingly in your work. Your manager should be giving you that feedback on an ongoing basis. It's just we don't typically take a lot of time to think about that in our day to day, giving that kind of feedback.
Yeah, yeah, Laura, it blows my mind that we give more iterative feedback to a restaurant on Yelp, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can go on Yelp or Google reviews, and these are all opportunities to improve. These are opportunities to celebrate. If you ever open up a Yelp page, and if you're like me, it's like, what should I eat? At any given day, and you open it up, and there are constantly all of these nuggets on how that business can do better, right? How that server could do better, how that back of the house could do better. And I think about knowledge workers, and I'm like, shit, what if I got that, right?
Hmm.
What if I got those celebrations, and what if I got those chances of improving in these micro doses along the way, right? Like, what could I be? And I give this example all the time. It's like, Kobe Bryant didn't wait till the end of the season for somebody to be like, hey, you didn't play well 8 games. You should really think about that. And
Hmm.
here's how you could have improved that. It's game time, right? It's in the game. It's after the game. It's the review tapes. It's the prep before the next game. And if we treated like knowledge workers, and if we treated like what we do from a B2B standpoint the same way, just imagine the potential of most organizations.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can absolutely see how AI can help us, for example, become better feedback givers, better construct the feedback, etc. Do you think that um, technology can also help us better receive the feedback as people on the other end of it? Like, does it take away some of that emotional association or feelings associated with performance coaching? Where, for example, if you're giving a restaurant review, like on the other end, we are thinking about the restaurant, right? And it's like a non-human being. But I think some of the reason why we tend to withhold feedback from our teams is because we kind of feel like, oh, we'll hurt their feelings, and we don't know how to
Hmm.
do it well. Do you think as the receiver, like technology will also help sort of mitigate some of those feelings?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, we're human, right?
Mm.
And part of being human is like we've got emotion, and you got to love the emotion, right? The emotion helps us sometimes rise above or have that breakthrough moment, and persevere and get through. And, we can't fault that emotion. And there's always this fear, right? Fear of giving critical feedback. And um, let's, let's not give it, or let's give it in a gentle way, or let's give it in a way that, you know, um, might work, might not work, etc. And um, I do think there's like a little bit of this rise in like companionship, and like AI serving as this sort of companionship piece where, data is supporting the idea that we are receptive to
Mm.
feedback, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Coming in from this way, right? And so I, I have been for a very long time, like feeding my scripts and like my AI transcripts into, ChatGPT, and asking for improvement, and like, hey, what could I have done better? What could I have delivered better? And um, yeah, I do think we're all ultimately. It doesn't change the fact that like managers need to get comfortable with giving feedback,
Right. 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 Right.
and like the goal of HatchProof is like to elevate that era too, right? We shouldn't look at AI as like, let me obfuscate my responsibility onto AI, right? Because we do that as humans, right? Let me obfuscate my responsibility to somebody else to make that decision. And the truth is, like, yeah, the higher up you go, like the tougher the decisions, the brevity of those decisions. And um, when I was at Instapage, um, we did 3 rounds of riffs at one point.
Mm,
And those are really, really tough decisions. There's humans on the other side of that, right? There's mortgages, there's families, there's that's not decisions that I took very, very lightly, right? And you have to weigh it, and you can't just obfuscate that to an AI of like, hey, you know, um, dehumanize this and like do this for me.
yeah. Yeah. Okay. One of the things that we had spoken about before was the depth that lived experience gives us in terms of
Mm,
experience and skills. And even though we may be hiring for capability, the ability to get there at some point, right? There are some things that um, there are some jobs that require some kind of hard skills, and that now with uh, you know personal productivity AI and the ability to find answers like straight away, what are your thoughts on AI sort of robbing younger people in the workforce of that lived experience that helps us become experts?
yeah, I'm a visual learner, right? I think first and foremost, like we have to understand how we learn. I learn by doing. And if you are somebody who learns by doing, taking a shortcut on that, is never profitable in the long term for both me as an individual and to the organization I serve, right? Um, and so like I think that we do live in a society where like we want things faster. We want things in micro doses. We even ingest our news in 15-second increments, and like the way we associate or connect with people. And so I think there is this pull towards like skipping the hard stuff.
Yes.
But sometimes I think, Laura, like the hard stuff makes us who we are, right? The hard stuff is that lived experience piece. And so I don't have an answer, right? I don't have an answer of what this means for the output of like, employees that we see out there or candidates that we see out there who miss out on that, formidable, grind, right? Like as we like to call our early years. And I think all of us kind of remark to say, "Oh yeah, I remember working 80-hour weeks and having to do this and do that." And it was super shitty at the time, right? It was crazy. But you look back at it now and you're like, "Oh, that's part of like what gave me my work ethic, or that's part of what made me this." And you just fill in the blank. And so I don't know what's going to replace that.
Mm.
I don't know what's going to replace that. Um, do you remember, high school and like, I don't know, math or geometry or something like that? The back of the textbooks always had the answer, right? And you always had this option to go to the back of the textbook and see the answer. But what you were tested for, or like, the critical thinking or the applied learning was like the formula that got you to that answer,
Like
right?
show your work kind of thing.
Show your work, right? Show your work. And so, like, what is the show your work of work, right? What is the show your work, right? And um, I think that that's going to be really tough to fake inside of an organization for a long, sustained period of time. If you can't show your work, maybe you can get there, you can give the right answers, like jump to the back of the textbook and give some of those answers because of AI. But, if you're only surface level, that show your work piece is going to be missing.
Yeah. And that actually creates um, a different challenge or a corresponding challenge for
Yeah.
leaders and hiring managers, because they are going to need to become even more critical in being able to ask the question of, well, tell me how did you show your work, basically asking those questions versus just focusing on the outcome, right? So like the managers themselves are going to have to, I think, up level as a result of this, advance in technology, let's say.
Yeah, I certainly think so
Mm,
because it's no longer going to be the answer that's important. It's our arrival to it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's an um, old sort of saying and metaphor, and there's so many different versions of it, but like man walks into a gymnasium and the floorboards are creaking, and um, a guy says, "Hey, it's creaking. Can you fix it for me?" The guy who owns the gymnasium and walks around a little bit, pulls out a nail, and hammers it into the ground, and the creaking stops, and hands him a bill for $100.10. And he's like, "You were here a couple minutes." And the saying is, yeah, 10 cents for the nail, $100 for knowing where to hit it,
Right.
right? And I think that knowing where to hit it, right, piece is part of that show your work and show the value piece.
Mhm. One of the things that we spoke about earlier also was around constraints and how like AI is just gonna like like we talked about earlier in this conversation, AI is just at its infancy and we could be doing so much more. And a lot of it is like we don't even know what we could be doing with it. What do you think is one role that humans can play as AI becomes even more capable that you think we will continue only humans will continue to be able to do?
Um, it's a really good question. Um, I think, and I was hearing sort of Simon Sinek talk about this as well.
Mm,
And the ultra human characteristics of what make us us, the emotion, the empathy, the ability to understand the complexity of the layers and digging into that. Um, Again, I think like businesses or like success in any organization is a component of like that human aspect of it. And so the I do still think we're gonna hold on to that, right? AI is again a tool that's gonna help us, either have that giant leap forward and those efficiency gains in what we're capable of doing. But it's not a replacement. It still needs an operator, to do the task, or, to point in the right direction. And so I think that's what we're gonna kinda continue down that road. That's the construct of how we've seen technology. Um, you know, there's some examples of like technology independence, but um, you know, the use cases of that aren't gonna be the masses.
yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome, Imran. Let's learn a little bit about you before we wrap up here. Maybe going back to cutting your teeth and the lived experience. What's like one
Yeah.
mistake that you were allowed to make maybe earlier on in your career that today's workforce may not be able to do?
Um, I I tried a lot of things super early on in my career. And if you go and take a look, I started off in entertainment. My first job was an internship where I worked for free at MGM Home Entertainment. Um, that got me a job at Disney, and then I jumped into energy. My dad was from the energy sector. I worked in nuclear energy of all things. I was Orange Bat certified. Um, and then I went into technology, and like one of the my mentors shared with me that early in your career, try as many verticals and as many industries as possible. And I had the gift of being able to do that. And what I loved about technology was how quickly it was moving and advancing, and my ability to like jump into a lot of different areas really rapidly for learning. I hold learning as like the ultimate value for me, right? Beyond, compensation, or like, I hold that at the highest regard. So I always go towards where I'm going to learn the most.
Sure, sure.
And so that was really awesome, and being able to do that. And then lastly, like I came from a wonderful parental unit, and truly, truly blessed. And I kind of grew up with a like, I couldn't fail, right? Like, I couldn't fail mentality. Um, and I'll give you a really quick example. Like, when I was a kid, I used to write on the wall, and, in my early teens, I wrote quotes on a wall in my bedroom. And, most parents would be like, "What the fuck are you doing?" Right?
Right,
Like, "Why
right.
are you writing on the wall?" my parents show up with like a box of markers and like, hey, anytime you see something you like, write it up there. And yeah, they would show up with their friends and be like, hey, check out these quotes that Imran put. Aren't these awesome? And Laura, you tell me, like when you have parents in a foundation like that, like it's pretty fucking hard to fail.
Okay.
And like your risk tolerance is super high, and you feel like you can take on anything. And so I got super super lucky with my upbringing that celebrated resilience, that celebrated being different, that celebrated going out and trying things.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's an amazing story. Okay, cool. And let's see, what kind of advice then would you give to young people, specifically maybe about not finding not looking to, not turning to the last page of the textbook and finding the answer? What would you say to them about being worried about, getting it wrong, or not, being resilient, just kind of like what you were talking to? How would you give them advice on like how to approach that conversation with whoever's asking about it?
If we're lucky, we're gonna do maybe one thing that moves the needle in our lifetime,
Okay.
right? A
Mhm.
100 years from now,
Okay.
and we should stop overthinking. Fear is an incredible emotion. It's one that's kept us alive for centuries, and but it's also a very, very, uh, very, very adversarial emotion that can paralyze us.
Mm,
And when we overthink, we kind of put ourselves in cement. And um, stop overthinking. Just do. Just fucking do. Just step one step in the direction of just doing, and uh, shit will figure itself out. I think a lot of young people get very fixated on like, this is what I want to be. This is the end goal, and I get it. Like, we're starting with the end in mind and all this stuff, but just go, just get started.
just get started. Bias for action. Keep going
Hmm.
and take kind of like the first step, right? And then you'll get to kind of where you want to be. Maybe is
Yeah, and you'll be surprised. Like the journey moves a lot of different directions. I talk to a lot of folks, and they're very like, this is where I'm going, and this is how I'm getting there. And you're talking about that lived experience. You're talking about not skipping to the end, and the best parts in the books are like through the middle, right? That's where all the learning is. So don't short sell that to yourself.
awesome. Imran, it was a pleasure speaking with you. Is there anything that you'll like to leave the audience with before we wrap up and close up here?
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for having me, Laura. Love partnering, and check out HatchProof. We're at HatchProof.com. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to help in any way, whether that's career trajectory or what you're doing, or how you're thinking about performance. But appreciate the platform, and thanks so much.
Thank you so much. And to the audience, if you like this episode, please leave us a note, drop us a comment so we can give you more of that. Thank you and see you next time. This episode was brought to you by DevRev for Startups. If you're a founder building with AI and have a story worth sharing, we'd love to hear from you at startups@devrev.ai. Don't forget to explore the DevRev for Startups program on devrev.ai/startups, where you can get up to 12 months of credits and much more to experience true team intelligence with Computer, your AI teammate.